So 2 days ago, I was invited to speak at a religious girls' school in Long Island in New York. I spoke there 4 years before, which is interesting because the last time I was speaking in Stanmore's show, in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, was also 4 years before. So the Rebbitzin who was in charge, one of the teachers, escorted 200 young ladies, we would say 5th and 6th form, they say it differently in America, and they occupied the seats, and I was brought in, Exhibit 1, to address them about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And the Rebbitzin had said to me, when I sent her a text, how long should I speak for? She replied, 40 minutes. And if you could repeat what you said to the girls 4 years before, she said, that would be perfect. Because I'd spoken to these girls at the exact same time of year 4 years before. And so I read this to the girls. I explained that the Rebbitzin is also the Rebbitzin of the synagogue that I pray in, so I had to obviously try and fulfill her requests. However, this one, I should say precisely what I said 4 years before, presented me with an enormous problem. In fact, two enormous problems. The first one is that saying the exact same thing that you said another time, an earlier time, even if it's 4 years before, is a speaker's nightmare. I'm always terrified that I'm going to say the same thing again, and I've forgotten I told that story or gave that shear in a previous occasion. That's the first problem. The second problem, I asked the girls if they could guess what that one was, and probably listening to this or watching this video, you probably can guess as well. How on earth does she expect me to remember what I said 4 years before? You can't remember what you said 4 years before. The girls got that one. I won't tell you the Rebbitzin's name, just so we keep her reputation intact. So this double whammy, this double terrifying idea of repeating yourself and not being able to remember is something that doesn't just affect speakers. It affects Jews, particularly at this time of the year. I don't know if you've had this experience. I mean, anybody who takes Yom Kippur seriously and realizes it's the last moment before we are able to step into the new year with some confidence that what we've done in Rosh Hashanah and the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur might succeed in making our year a good new year. When we're at that particular moment in time, then obviously people are doing their best. They're really trying their best. And some people, including me, have the custom of writing a list of particular things they want to apologize to the Almighty about when it comes to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And they put this inside your machzor. And one year I composed my new list and I put it inside my machzor and I opened the machzor to insert it, and there was an old list from a previous year. So I took both lists out and I looked to contrast and to compare, and guess what? I'm sure you can guess what, that even though the list was from 8 years before, it was precisely and exactly in every respect the same list of things that I had to put right on this year. And when that happens, obviously I had forgotten from before. We do forget what we did in previous years. That's one of the big challenges of Yom Kippur. And if you're standing there and repeating the same thing from a previous year, then by definition, you're going to feel, I think, rather bad about yourself. I do. And I did. I felt a complete hypocrite. Rubinstein, are you honestly going to stand in front of God again, on Yom Kippur again, and say you're sorry again? From 8 years before you said that. So the likelihood of you not repeating the mistake again in the next year is tantamount to zero. And you almost feel like shrugging your shoulders and walking out of shul, because what is the point? So I want to let you know that that conclusion is fundamentally flawed. It's a fundamentally non-Jewish conclusion. There is an incredibly interesting teaching which you'll find both in the Kabbalistic writings and also in the Midrashic writings. And it focuses on a very famous verse in Genesis. In Genesis, it says God creates the world, 6 days. We're all familiar with the story. And when he finishes creating the world, it says God looks and he sees that it's Tov Me'od. Very good. Now let's just pause for a second. If somebody uses the phrase, that's very good, what's the implication of the phrase, something is very good? If somebody makes you a cup of coffee and you say, that's very good, it rather implies that the last cup of coffee you drank before it wasn't so good. When I'm teaching in yeshiva in New York, young men, I sometimes warn them that one day soon they will be married. Now, I don't want to, this is terribly sexist, and I do apologize, particularly to those who are into political correctness, but in my experience, young men, and I used to be a young man, not too long ago, are, how should I put this, challenged when it comes to common sense. And so I try to warn them that one day they will be married. And they sort of like go, and one day your wife will bring you in a meal, which she's made specially for you. And they go, and I said, when you eat the meal, you, being a young man, and therefore challenged, will think that it would be very nice to show your appreciation for your wife's efforts, and it'll be a bonding experience. So you turn with your best smile and say, no, sweetheart, that was a really good meal. And because you're a male, you think that she heard that as a compliment. But men and women are different. You thought it was a compliment, she thought it was an insult. Because in her mind, she's thinking, what was wrong with last night's meal? And the night before? And of course, if her mother is there, there's a strong possibility that you'll be wearing the meal as your yarmulke, as she puts it on your head. Because the implication of something being very good is that something else wasn't so good. So God creates the world, and it says in Genesis, in Bereshit, and he sees that it was very good. The implication is, in saying that this world, our world, is very good, it rather implies that previous worlds weren't so good. Did God make previous worlds that weren't any good? And the Midrash says yes. God made other worlds, which were flops, which were no good at all. Now, let's just consider that idea for a second. Obviously, this is an extremely problematic story I'm telling you, for a very obvious reason. Number one, God doesn't make mistakes. In fact, there is only one word that does not occur in the vocabulary of the Almighty. Does anybody know, sitting here today watching this video, what that word is? The word is oops. God never says oops. God doesn't make mistakes. So what does it mean he made 974 failures, flops, worlds that were no good? He never says oops. It's an impossibility. And even if you were to imagine and conceive that God could make a mistake, why tell us about it? Why tell this to Moses and Mount Sinai so that it's written down in our traditions, in our medrash for generations to come, so that I can see it and share it here with you on this video? There was nobody from the previous worlds to turn around and say, oh, our world was horrible. It was grey and overcast, and it rained the entire time. In fact, we called the planet Manchester. There was nobody there to make that statement. So why tell us about it? Nobody else is going to tell us about it. You know the old phrase, surgeons bury their mistakes, if you follow. So somebody called the Or Hatzafon, he was the Rosh Hashiva of Mir, he says an incredibly interesting thing. He says God made 974 intentional failures and told us about it so that we should understand and realize that the entire basis of this world is getting it wrong before you get it right. You're expected to make mistakes. You're not expected to be perfect. You're here for a long time. And that means to say that you're going to have one mistake in your life, or two mistakes in your life, or three mistakes in one day. But as long as you're learning from the mistakes and putting them right, then really, what is the problem? God wants you to know, I know you're going to make mistakes. I made the world to advertise that you will make mistakes in order to get it right. Only through making mistakes will you get it right. So when the list falls out the master and it's the same as the previous year, doesn't mean to say that you're a failure. Just because you got it wrong, just because you made a mistake, doesn't make you a failure. You're only a failure if you give up. It might be that maybe Rubinstein, me, I should look at the list from 8 years ago and say, maybe I'm not taking it seriously enough, maybe I'm not trying to learn enough from it, but just because you made mistakes, so what? One of the classic Musar works, ethical works, a bit of Kabbalah in it by somebody called the Ramchal, who was a 15th century Italian Kabbalist. He points out that even the biggest sins, murder and adultery, rather serious from a Jewish point of view, God can forgive you for those too. And the Rambam famously says that how do you know if you've actually changed? And he gives an example of a sexual crime. Imagine somebody is a businessman, he owns a large business, he's alone in the office, and there's a secretary there who's extremely attractive. He's attracted to her, she's attracted to him, and you can probably guess where this goes and how that story ends. And then, a month later, he finds himself in the exact same circumstances. But this time, he doesn't commit adultery with this woman. He feels, says the Rambam, exactly attracted to her as he did before. She's attracted to him as she felt before. The circumstances are identical, the opportunity is there, and yet he doesn't do it. But if everything's identical from before, what's changed? And the answer is he's changed. He's done something called teshuvah. He has said, I don't want to be this person anymore. And on that basis, the person who committed the adultery a month before, in the first instance, he no longer exists. He might look like this person, but that person no longer exists. That's just the outside. Inside, the real person has changed. So even for murder and even for adultery, a person can be forgiven for that too. So I suppose I could pause and ask if there's anybody watching this video who can, I'm sure there'll be maybe many people here, and I'm sure everybody is friends. So I think this is a moment to share. Please put up your hand and share with everybody watching this. If in the last 12 months you murdered somebody, I'm guessing no hands went up. But if a hand did go up, you should know that even for that, there can be forgiveness. And if you can be forgiven for murdering someone, you can certainly be forgiven for the fact that maybe you slipped up, as I have, in more elementary mistakes as we travel along the year together. But we do find ourselves slipping back, and we get frustrated with that. And we do repeat ourselves over and over again. So I want to tell you something which I think might be very useful. You see, when we find ourselves slipping back and doing the same thing again, and we feel bad about it, that's the clearest indication that we don't want to be doing this again. And very often we try and make our best efforts to make sure that we don't do the same thing again, and still we slip back. So the frustration just becomes magnified exponentially to the point where you might want to give up. So angry you are with yourself to having let yourself down one more time. But it might not be, it probably isn't that you don't want to change, it's just that maybe the way you've gone about changing hasn't worked. So there's an interesting, let me give an example. Suppose you went to the doctor because you had headaches and sore bones and you had a temperature, and the doctor says, oh yes, there's a lot of this going about, there's a bug. Take these blue tablets, one in the morning, one in the evening, for a week and you'll be fine. 7 days, and that'll be it. After 7 days, it's not it. You've just got the same sore bones, same headaches, same temperature as before, so you go back to see the doctor. And he says, oh really, I'll give you another prescription for another course of the blue tablets. So you have another course. You go back after a second course, and he gives you a third course. If you go back after 3 times, and he wants to give you a fourth course of the blue tablets, what should you do? Yeah, get a new doctor. The guy's an idiot. The blue tablets aren't working. You need pink tablets, or green tablets, or purple tablets. But this one doesn't work. And it's very often the case that you want to change, you want to stop doing stuff. It's just that the way that you've approached changing has been the wrong way. That's why it's not delivered what you want it to deliver. And one of the most important things I ever teach, and I speak all over the world, I basically say I only really teach 2 things. And one of them is, Ase lecha rav, get for yourself a rabbi. That means a mentor, a teacher, an advisor. And if you're a woman listening to this or watching this, then it says Ase lecha, it's talking to a man. You get a rabbi. For a woman, it should be Ase loch, Rebbitzin. You need a female figure who's able to help you. Somebody you trust, somebody you know, who'll keep your confidence, and you're able to sit down and say, look, I'm struggling with, and then say what your particular struggle is, because we all have our unique particular struggles. This is something I keep failing at. And it might well be that even though you can't think of a strategy that might work, or maybe you've been using the wrong strategy, maybe they'll be able to think of one. In fact, I saw in a Jewish book many years ago, it's a simple example. On Shabbat, one of the things you're not allowed to do is to cause bleeding. And very often, people have a problem with picking skin around their fingernails. I do not, but some people do. And of course, if you pick the skin around your fingernails, if that's a habit for you, then guess what? You might make it bleed. And yet, people do it over and over again. So somebody called Reb Chaim Friedlander, he gave a very, very simple solution to this one. It's going to sound a bit strange, but bear with me. He said, stop yourself doing it on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And you'll find it easier not to do it in Shabbat. You see, the Yetzer Hara, the Satan, the negative forces in the world, they don't care. He couldn't care less if you pick your fingernails on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. He wants to get you to do it in Shabbat. Then you're in trouble. Then you broke Shabbat. But if you train yourself not to do it in the days where he's really not concerned, then it'll become habitual of you not to do it. That's a brilliant piece of psychology. I never thought of that. I never saw that insight, but he saw that insight. So it might well be that you've been struggling with an issue, and here we're standing in Yom Kippur, or nearly in Yom Kippur, and you really want to get it right, and you're feeling so hypocritical because this is what you said 8 years ago or 10 years ago. It's not that you don't want to change, you do want to change. You really want to change. It's just maybe you've been going about it the wrong way. Look, you're expected to slip up. God made 974 failed worlds and told us about it to let you know that the basis of this world is getting it wrong before you get it right. And this is not the only Yom Kippur that we're standing hours away from that you will experience in your life. Most people will experience 70, 80, more these days Yom Kippurs. The idea is that God knows you'll slip up. As long as you're coming back, recharging your batteries, as long as you're there in shul, doing your best, sincerely as much as you can, saying sorry, he knows you're going in the right direction. And don't forget that when in just a very short space of time we'll be at the end of Yom Kippur and the doors are closing, what's called Ne'ilah. And maybe you'll be thinking, I don't know if I did very well. There used to be a TV program many thousands of years ago when I was young in the UK. I can't remember which channel it was on, but it was called Opportunity Knocks. And Opportunity Knocks was a talent show. I suppose like Britain's Got Talent, although I've never seen that, but I've heard about it. And what they used to do was they had a few people, maybe 6 or 7, who would perform. And at the end of the program, then the audience, the live audience in the program, would vote. And it was voting by their applause. And they had a thing called, wait for this, a clapometer. A clapometer. And it looked like a large glass tube. And it was like a thermometer. And basically, it reacted to the sound, the level, the volume of the applause. And the interesting thing of the program, the shtick of the program was, at the end of the program, the one with the loudest applause, you could see the thing going up. He or she won that particular program according to the audience. But then the people at home had to write in. The guy who presented was a Canadian guy called Huey Green, who was Jewish. And then the next week, it was the popular vote. And sometimes that was not the same as the claps. And I always used to think, wouldn't it be wonderful if somebody could invent a teshuvah-ometer, a penitence monitor that would be at the side of the Orna Kodesh. And you could see as the doors are closing in the Elah, the last moments of Yom Kippur are slipping away, and you could see that teshuvah-ometer, and it's something, it's only halfway up. And you go, oh no, really got to take this more seriously and get it right. Of course, we don't really have a teshuvah-ometer. And it might be that after a day in Yom Kippur, even if you take everything I've been telling you to heart and know that there's nothing you could have done wrong, nothing, including murder, that God can't forgive, and knowing that it doesn't matter that you've made the same mistake before as long as you're trying to put it right this time, you might still feel, how could I possibly succeed? I once knew a Jew. He was an amazing fellow, an old fellow. His son-in-law and daughter lived in Glasgow, although she was called Lise Friedman. She was born in Strasbourg, and he was born in Strasbourg as well. And he had fought. Now, Strasbourg, as it were, is on the border of France and Germany, and he had fought in both the French and the German armies. He was a cavalry officer in the French and German armies because Strasbourg kept transferring from France to Germany back again. He used to make the joke that if he put his hand on his head, on his helmet, and it was smooth, he knew he was in the French army. If he put his hand on his helmet and there was a spike sticking out of it, he was in the German army. And he survived the First World War. And when it came to the Second World War, of course, as a Jew, he had to flee and managed to flee. But he had a motto which I thought was extremely important. He said it in French, of course. He said, if you see a sign and the sign says, entrée interdit, right? No entry. So if you see a sign that says no entry, it's telling you a message. There's a door there. A sign that says don't come in, don't open this door, is telling you there's a door there. Even when the door seems closed, he felt, this was his motto, entrée interdit, that's how I get through. And there's a beautiful Hasidic story about the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, who once wanted to have a special afternoon, a special mincha service. And he told his assistant, his shamas, go into the town and collect for me 10 ganovim, 10 thieves. Anybody who's read the writings of Shalom Aleichem will know that in every town there was the town ganav. It was actually quite a respectable career. And he wanted, get me 10 ganovim, 10 thieves. And his shamas, his assistant, was absolutely perplexed by this. Why on earth would he want 10 ganovim? But he went and found 10 ganovim and said, this famous holy rabbi needs you for his minyan. They were obviously intrigued and went toddling along, and they davened mincha. And off they went. And the shamas said, why did you want them? And he said, I could see, and how he could do this, I don't know, but he could see that what he wanted to ask God for, or maybe what he wanted to apologize for, the gates of prayer were closed in heaven. I wanted the Genovim, I wanted a minion of 10 thieves, because a thief doesn't take a closed door as a no. In fact, if it's closed, all he has to do is to look for a way to get through. And I think really that's the message as we're about to go into Yom Kippur. That even if you feel that in the course of the year you've let yourself down, as I did when the same list fell out the matzah from 8 years before, then you've got to remind yourself that just because you failed doesn't make you a failure. Just because you failed doesn't make you a failure. You're only a failure if you give up. These Genovim wouldn't give up. They see a locked door, they're going to get through. You mustn't feel that your life's a locked door. And if you don't know how to solve the particular problem that you've been struggling with, maybe from 8 years ago or more recently, then don't do it alone. Just because you failed doesn't make you a failure. But certainly there'll be things that you must fail at because you do it alone. Find a Rov, find a Rebbitzin if you're a woman, find a mentor, somebody who's wise in Jewish knowledge, and say, I'd like as a Jew to be good at this and I struggle with it, and let them give you a piece of strategy that you might not have thought yourself. We say, or Ben Bagbag, famous convert to Judaism, says in the 5th parak of Pirkei Avos, hafach bo v'hafach bo dekadabo. Turn the Torah over and turn it over again, because everything's in it. And everything is in it includes the solution to the problem that you might be struggling about. Whether it's your relationship with God, whether it's a philosophical issue of why do bad things happen to good people, whether it's how can you possibly deal with somebody in your family or a friend or a colleague whom you don't get on with, or maybe you've done something to them, how can I get them to forgive me? The answer's in the Torah. And if you haven't found it, maybe this rabbi, this Rebbe, and somebody wise in Jewish ideas will be able to help you to find it. Oh, you think the door's closed? The door is never closed. You just need the determination of a thief, or the determination of somebody who sees a sign that says no entry, to know if I push hard enough, the door will open, even when it seems to be closing at the end of Yom Kippur. Let me wish you, and hope that echoes and rebounds back in me, this Yom Kippur, that we'll stand together wherever we're standing as part of the Jewish people and push those doors open to guarantee for you and your family and your community and my community and for the whole of the Jewish people a year of blessing and a year of success.